Hola, buenos días. See, it works when I speak Spanish. It doesn't like English. All right. Buenos dias. My name is Chance Strickland. If you looked at your lacquered and you saw the title of this talk and you were looking forward to hearing about guitars, I'm sorry. The React team did something really annoying and released version 19.2 like last week, and I had to change my talk up to talk about 19.2 because it is pretty cool. I'm actually really excited about this. One of the coolest minor releases, in my opinion, in a while. So let's jump into this, shall we? My name is Chance Strickland, as I just said. I work at WorkOS. I'm a software engineer there, and I work on a few open source libraries that you may be familiar with. I used to work on a library called ReachUI, which is a low-level accessibility-focused UI library that sort of came before what a lot of us know now is Radix UI, a team in which I also worked and helped co-create that library. I also worked on the Remix core team, helped get that launched and maintained React Router. So I had my hands in a few pots in the ecosystem over the years, and excited to be here talking to you a little bit more about new React features. So I'm just realizing none of my notes are showing up on the screen over here, so I'm going to take a moment here and try and stop mirroring. Technical times. Yes. There we go. That's what I wanted. Because I need to know what I'm saying. Sweet. So let's talk a little bit about the history of React, which we just heard a little bit about. I'm actually going to repeat a lot of what Mark had to say, but in a slightly different context to give a different window into how we've progressed over the years. So going back from the very beginning, like when React first hit the scene and sort of took us all by storm, what was the sort of magic, the it factor that told us that maybe we should rethink how we think of best practices? And it came down to two things, in my opinion. It was the underlying declarative nature of the API and the rendering model, and component composition. Without those two things, React doesn't really exist. And a lot of people look at React over the years and see a lot of change. We just saw sort of a brief walkthrough of a lot of that change, and where we are today feels in many ways very different from where we started. But really, like, when you break it down, most of the new APIs and the new features that we have in React from the very beginning have been designed to make a lot of really hard problems easier to solve by making the code more declarative and more composable. And React told us that a developer should only have to think about the what, which is the state, and the when, the events that trigger state updates, and not the how, right? That's declarative. The definition of declarative programming. And so, we describe our UI as a function of state, and React sort of ties it all together and promises us at the end that everything will be in sync, and we don't have to think of that, right? And then the composition comes in with the component model, right? So components we think of as these reusable building blocks that you can sort of drop in anywhere. They've got their own self-contained logic. You can pass in data via props, this one-way data flow, and it reduces very tight coupling between different pieces of our UI, which is very nice. And then, and then 2018 came around, and we saw our first major addition to the React API since it became stable, hooks. We all really quickly went and refactored our entire code base to use hooks. Never looked back, right? So we went from lifecycle methods to hooks, and what was the core idea here? Everyone looked at this and it was kind of polarizing, but a lot of people got really excited because what was it? It was a way to make logic and behavior of our components, not just the UI and the rendering, but the logic and behavior more declarative and more composable. We didn't have to think about when the component mounted, when it updated, what props changed, when it unmounts. We just said, synchronize this state with this effect. Drop in this piece of state, return this piece of state. You can move that to a custom hook and call that from any component, and now you have these little chunks of reusable, composable functions. that bring in all of that stateful logic. So yeah, it was really built on the back of the same exact principles that React started with. So it's hard to argue that hooks were not well aligned with the original vision and promise of React. So we didn't really deviate, I think, as far as some people might think. And then later in 2018, we got suspense. And this made async rendering more declarative and more composable. And it's a very simple idea on the surface. You take a component and it shows a fallback while some child component is loading or doing something, right? But it's a lot more interesting than I think you really realize when you first look at it, because what does it mean for a component to be doing something? That's not a thing that we're used to, right? Like components render synchronously. They're synchronous functions. They just render something. All the stuff they do, like any sort of async logic, is tucked away into an effect. But suddenly, we've been introduced to this idea of asynchronicity in our component rendering. We didn't have server components at the time, so there was no async component, but we did have lazy loading, right? Where you could, on demand, load a chunk of code. And you could use suspense to render that lazy loaded component, and while the browser pulled in that chunk and parsed it and did all the hydration, you would see a fallback, right? And you had this very nice packaged API for displaying that fallback, very declarative, very composable. And this very simple idea really laid the groundwork for so much more that we have in React now. And it's all because of composition and declarative APIs. And so 2022 rolls around, we get React 18, and with it, the first implementation of React Server Components. And then all of the transition APIs related to concurrent rendering and dealing with server components in this new asynchronous world. A server component is an asynchronous function. It returns a promise, and that promise resolves to some payload that you're going to get across the wire. And so what do React Server Components do? They make crossing the network composable and declarative. It's all just React 1.0, just extended, and it continues to extend. And the React team continues to ask us, what else can we simplify by making everything more declarative and more composable? And so I want to set this tone as a reminder for everyone who looks at React now and thinks to themselves, wow, I don't recognize this anymore. It's all new, it's all crazy. What are we doing here? How did we get to server components? And it's really about composition, right? And I think if we think of it that way, the possibility, we keep an open mind, the possibilities are really cool. And so I want to talk a little bit about what else the React team has been working on to make our code more declarative and more composable, all right? So let's jump into a demo. This is where we're going to go into mirroring. There we go. All right. Also going to grab some water real quick because your boy is thirsty. All right. So we've got an app here. I'll go ahead and run it. I think it's already running, so let's just go ahead and open it up. Boom, there we go. So we got a video player app, and we've got some code. Let's go and jump into just a component here. I'll move. Can everybody see the code? Okay, is it big enough? Okay, do you all like my theme? Is the light theme going to bother anyone? If not, we can use my dark theme of choice. So is that better? No? Okay. We'll jump back to, I think light theme's okay. Cool. All right, so we got ourselves a video player app here. And we've got a couple requirements we need to take a look at. So we navigate around here. We see we've got a list of videos, music videos, of all the best bands in the world. And we have a little sidebar here that toggles on and off that allows us to search through our music library. We can do a little asynchronous client-side search here. We can click through to different albums and see a listing of videos for that given album. And then we can go back and go into a video. And then we can click a video to open it, and it will start playing. Did we get audio? We didn't get audio. Good, no audio, sweet. We can go into theater mode, which is what I called it just because I copied YouTube. That's what they call it. And yeah, this is a pretty simple video app. And you know, we navigate around and it works pretty well, but everything seems sort of jarring, and you know, it'd be nice to have some animations in here. I think we want to introduce some of those. And you know, we also got some user feedback about our sidebar panel here. You know, we take a look at what we've got. We've got a search bar here and a filter, and you know, a user came to us and said, okay, I started searching for something, and I went through my list of videos, and you know, I found something I wanted. I went and clicked into that album, and I opened the video, and I wanted to see the video a little larger, so I closed the library, and I watched the video, and then I reopened the library, and I realized all of my state is gone, right? Like the search bar is now cleared. Well, why is that? Well, that's because the search bar state is self-contained within this component that we conditionally render, right? If we go into our sidebar, we see that the sidebar component, it's got this toggle code, and inside of the actual, the guts of the sidebar, it's just passing through the children, right? And if we go into our player layout view, we'll see that the sidebar's children in this case is our library. The sidebar's kind of, you know, as a component is supposed to be, as it's composable, it's reusable. You should be able to drop different things in and out. So in a different view, the sidebar might have something completely different. So we've decoupled these things, right? And so in this case, our sidebar is rendering our library. And you know, we go into our library code, and this is a server component. So of course, you know, one of the nice little fun things about server components is that you end up introducing these wrapper components when you need something that's a client component that receives some data, which I know a lot of people have issues with, but there's good reasons for that, nonetheless. You know, we go into, let's look for our search here. So see if we can find our library search. So our library search is just this text input here. It's not actually a controlled component, so all the state, it lives in the DOM. And what happens is it lives inside of a form. Do you guys remember forms? That's, I don't know, like Web 1.0, but we still use them. They still work. And so every time you trigger a change event, it actually submits this form, so we don't have to control the state, which is kind of nice because controlling form state kind of sucks. And, but the issue here is that the state disappears, right? And how do we fix that? Well, how do we maintain state in a component that conditionally renders? We lift it up, right? Like that's the whole idea. We lift state up. We lift it to the next component, we pass it in, and we control it. But that kind of sucks in this case, right? Like I don't want to have to control the state because we all hate managing form state. And also, where would we lift it? Into the sidebar? Because that's what conditionally renders the child. But now the sidebar is coupled to our library. And we don't want that because the sidebar could be rendering anything. And what if it is rendering something else in a different view? And those things all have controlled state. And we have the same problem there. Do we lift all of that state to the sidebar? Now the sidebar is managing state for God knows how many components? Not particularly ideal, I don't think. But we need some way to maintain the state, because when you conditionally render or don't render a component, you just you wipe out all of the state, whether that's React's state or the DOM state in this case, because you just pull the DOM element out completely. And so we want to maintain that state somehow. Another thing interesting to notice is if I pull this down a little bit, we have some other state in this sidebar. We've got scroll bar state, right? Like, so I go down here and I scroll to another album, I close the library, I open it up, what happens? We jump back to the top. We want to maintain that state too. So we want this thing to feel a little less janky and more fluid. When you hide the library and reshow it, we want to come back right where we left off. And so there's a couple different ways we could approach this. We talked about lifting the state up. We could also not conditionally render this thing, but instead conditionally show or hide it using a wrapper container div or something, and then hide it with CSS. But that's kind of annoying because now we have introduced this extra DOM node that we don't necessarily need or want. Could mess with our layout. And so what do we do? Well, React 19.2 gives us this really interesting new API called Activity. And we're going to bring this in. And it is stable as of 19.2, which came out just a few days ago. And we're going to drop this in here. We're going to, instead of conditionally rendering our children, we're just going to render our children, and then activity takes a prop. I thought I turned off Copilot. Go away, Copilot. We don't want you. Copilot hasn't been trained on anything new, so we're going to say conditionally show or hide this based on the sidebar state. So if it's shown, we want it to be visible. If not, it's hidden. And this is an enum prop. Presumably, they're going to introduce more modes in the future, TBD, but I'm interested to see what that rationale is here. But for the moment, you can either hide or show the thing, right? And so now, if we go in and start filtering, close our library, reopen it, we have maintained the state. And how does that work? Well, if we inspect our element here and take a look at our sidebar, when we close it, we see the library, the outer div, it does what I said we could have done manually, and it applies a style of display none, right? And well, why didn't we do that manually again? We didn't want to introduce a new DOM node. And the reason React's able to do this is because React DOM is able to look through the actual DOM tree without you, the developer, having to explicitly say, you know, like whatever thing happens to be here, you know, we want to dig into that. Like we could use a fragment and give it a ref, but wait, fragments don't take refs, so like this is a whole thing. And just to avoid that, React is smart and able to do that for us. And this seems very simple, and you're probably like, okay, and big deal. I think it's a big deal, and there's a lot of other reasons for that. Remember we talked about concurrent rendering and asynchronicity of React components? Another really cool thing of activity is that anything that is visually hidden gets deprioritized by the React scheduler. And if you don't know what the React scheduler is, I encourage you to learn a little bit about it because it's basically how React works now. React is able to sort of decide what to render at what level of priority, which is actually really useful if your component does something really performance intensive. And so in this case, if our hidden stuff, and it is actually, our library is a server component that's fetching its own data. If that's a lot of data or the source is very slow, React deprioritizes that. So it doesn't get in the way or block rendering of anything else on the page, which is really nice. To actually do that manually would be a lot more burdensome than just wrapping something in a component and telling it to hide it, right? So it's more than just visually hiding. It's telling React, we'll come back to this later. Here's the condition in which I need you to like actually reprioritize this thing. And it allows us to sort of move a little quicker around. And what is it? It's very declarative. It's very composable. The children can still be whatever they want to do. You don't have to touch the implementation of the inner components. So I think this is pretty sweet. No, I thought this is where people clap. No, I thought you're supposed to clap because like I'm like live coding. It actually worked the first time. You guys clap for Eric's lights on multiple occasions. I should have lights and props. That would have made this way more interesting, I think. Cool. So let's go back to our demo and take a look at another thing we might want to do. We talked a little bit about earlier about how you're navigating around the app and feels a little, jarring and fast. Everything just sort of like transitions, and we want it to, it's a spa. We want it to feel nice and smooth. Maybe introduce some animations. When I click this video, maybe I want it to animate in rather than just jump in. Okay. So let's go back to our library real quick. So who here is familiar with a new DOM API, the View Transition API? Show of hands. Not a lot? Cool, that's great. I'm excited to tell you about it. So new DOM API. If you go to MDN, you can check it out. There's this whole new View Transition API with different underlying APIs to essentially what you do is you use it to trigger View animations. And so MDN gives us this nice little carousel example where I click an item and each item like animates in smoothly, or it should. Looks like it's buggy, which is fine. That's actually one of the selling points of what we're going to talk about. So this, again, like you look at this and you're like, so what, I can do this with CSS. Well, sort of true. The implementation is actually very interesting and a lot more flexible. So what happens here is under the hood, the document now has a new method, and it's called start view transition. And what this method does is it's an asynchronous, or it takes an asynchronous function that once you call start view transition, the browser will actually take a literal screenshot or a snapshot in time of what the browser looks like at that particular point in time, or what the container that you're transitioning looks like. And in the next frame, it does an exit transition for that screenshot, or snapshot, is what the docs call it. And then the new DOM is inserted immediately behind it, but you don't actually necessarily see it immediately because the old thing is exiting. And so you get this sort of simulated CSS transition, but it's a lot more flexible, because if you've ever tried to use CSS animations or transitions for things like moving things around a complex grid or moving things when you navigate pages, it's really tricky because you don't necessarily know what's going to be on the next screen. And also, there might be completely new elements on the next screen. You can't animate one element into another element, right? So if you take a snapshot of whatever this thing looks like in time, now you suddenly have so much more potential. And it also works across multi-page application navigations, which is just bananas. You can make an old school website, no React, no SPA, and actually animate the views when you navigate, which is pretty cool. And we can do this in React, right? React's just JavaScript, so why don't we go and do this somewhere? So what we want to do is we want to, let's go back to our demo, and when I click this video, what I really want to happen is I want it to animate open, right? So let's go and do that. Let's say we're going to go to our video view. I think we've got a video player. Yeah, there we go. And actually, you know what? I want the thumbnail, because I want to start by animating the thumbnail. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say on click here, define a function that when you click the thumbnail, we want to trigger this animation, right? And so what happens? We want to call document.start view transition. Like I said, it takes an asynchronous function that is going to trigger our actual transition here. And what are we going to do? We want to actually transition this thumbnail out. So I'm going to go in and say I need to have access to the node, so I'm going to go ahead and create a ref. I'm going to make TypeScript happy, import my ref, and now we have a ref, so we can say on our elements handler. Cool. All right, so we have our element, we are starting a transition, and what do we want to do? Well, the way view transitions work, if we go and take a look at the docs, is, so like I said, we take the snapshot, we do one thing, we pull out one component, we add a new one. Well, how does the actual animation look on screen? Well, that's all CSS. So you have these new pseudo selectors. I don't know if you can see this, but it looks something like this. You know, you've got view transition, sort of function selectors, and they take different arguments. And so, you know, we might go into some CSS here and have these selectors that say, what do we want? We want the old view. We want to select the old view, and we want to look for a class. And if an element on the screen has this class while the old view is leaving, we want to apply this animation property. And view transition new says, whatever the new screen is, we want to apply this animation property. So still CSS, and so what do we want to do? We need to add this class name to the element, the slow fade class, right? So when we start our transition, or before we start the transition, because we want this to apply before to get that old snapshot, we want to add the class. Let's see how far I actually get without Copilot. Okay, so we want to start this transition. We add the class name. We want to start the transition, and then what do we want to do once we're in here? We want to, so what's actually happening on click now? So right now, the video thumbnail, it isn't actually doing anything. Ooh, we got a ref prop already. I'm going to pull that out. So, oh yeah, so it's got a little key down because this is a fake button. And so, okay, so all of our updates are happening on click, right? So we're going to just say props on click here because presumably the parent is making whatever updates that we need. And then once we do that, we want to remove our class because we don't need it anymore, right? And that might work, but wait a second. I said that our start view transition triggers the transition, and it's asynchronous, right? Well, what else is asynchronous in React? Anybody? State updates, right? React is batching now. So state, just because you call set state doesn't mean it's necessarily going to set the state after that function call. The state might not be updated. Whatever elements on screen depend on that state to be updated are not going to actually necessarily be updated. But for a view transition, we need those updates to be guaranteed before that transition actually starts and finishes. So we actually have to call this thing called flush sync from React DOM that is going to guarantee that anything after is, come on now, how do you not know where my import is? Flush sync, boom. So anything that is that happens after flush sync, we're guaranteed by that point for all of the updates that React has queued inside of that function to be completely flushed and updated on screen. So now we should be able to go into our components and see what we're doing wrong. What's that? Ah, good call. Thank you. Live coding, it's fun. There we go. That's cool, right? Exactly what I said we would do. We would click it, and we now have this fade transition. And we might want to do a slide. Thank you, thank you. Come on, come on. I need. My ego is dependent on your claps. So that works, but here's the thing now. This is interesting, but what happens when we click this little X button here and we want to go back to our normal mode? It goes immediately. Well, now we want to wire up a view transition in the little close button. But we're not actually transitioning the close button, we're transitioning something unrelated to the close button. So we need to find somehow a DOM reference to that thing that we're transitioning and be able to transition back and forth. And we also need to transition back to the thumbnail in some cases. So maybe in our video, we have to add a transition that references our thumbnail, and these things are completely unrelated in the React tree, and that's not composable. It creates all this weird coupling, and we don't want to do that. So what do we do? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's go back and undo all this stuff. So back in our video view, we can introduce what React calls as a view transition, aptly named here. So what do we have? We've got a video player, we've got a video thumbnail, and we want to transition between the two of them. So what do? Well, what if I told you all we had to do is this? You guys are really going to clap now. No, you're not. We pulled it out here. What did I do wrong? Okay, come on. Let's go back and take a look at the docs. That's what we do when we break something. We look at the docs. All right, so view transition is, are we actually importing it? We are, good. Let's see, how does view transition work? You'd think I'd know that. I wrote the demo. All right, let's see, what are we doing here? Oh, you know what? Actually, I think is the issue is these are unrelated trees, so we would need to do a shared element transition. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to go in and actually wrap our video player. Yes. And there's a way to deal with this, by the way, that doesn't involve going into the implementation here. But and so this is unstable still. The React team is still working on it. It should be available in Canary now, I believe. And so they're working on a solution to some edge cases here that they deal with under the hood. But I still think it is worth checking out whenever you have an opportunity. Cross your fingers for me. What? What? It's supposed to fade. What have we done? We broke the demo. All right, well, don't clap for me. I'm sorry that I have failed you. But I did something wrong. No, it's cool, it's cool. I don't know what I did wrong, but this is, this is what you get when you try and live code in front of people, is you screw up sometimes in unknown ways. So I don't actually know what I'm doing wrong here. Oh, I do know what I'm doing wrong. I totally, this is actually foundational as to why view transitions work in the first place, right? We need to tell the thing that something's transitioning, right? Like right now we're just doing an update, but React needs some mechanism for actually queuing that transition, right? It's not just going to animate everything under the tree, because some things might update, some things might not update, and you might actually want a little bit more granular control over the types of things that update. And so what if React offered an API that allowed you to explicitly say, I want to transition this particular state update, not just the tree, but this particular update. So you can hyper-target specific updates. What would that look like? Well, what if I told you React already had an API for transitions? Anybody know use transition? So let's go and take a look at our video view again, and what do we do? What do we want to animate? We want to animate theater mode. And so what I'm going to do here is, instead of just updating the state immediately, I'm going to say, I want to transition. And so I'm going to call use transition. I'm going to say is pending and start transition. Okay? And now, when I go into theater mode, instead of updating, I want to start a transition that will then apply. And God help me if this doesn't work. It doesn't work. I'm going to do that here too. There we go. Oh my God, we did it! I was like sweating. I got 1 minute, 15 seconds left. Holy crap. Thanks for hanging with me, guys. I appreciate it. Our exit doesn't work, but that's fine. We got one. Yeah, we also need to go into our video player here and go to our exit button. Exit button here, and we want to do wherever this thing happens to be. There we go. So let's just go ahead and do that too. And you can just start a global transition too. It doesn't necessarily need to be a use transition. There we go. Perfect. All right, so wasted all that time trying to fix my mistakes, but what actually happened here is we took a bunch of really gross imperative code that would have required us to do all this really interesting coupling of components and like searching for DOM references, and we'd have to bring in jQuery because nobody knows about document query selector, and nobody wants to do all that. So what do? We made view transitions declarative, we made it composable, and true to React, it's a beautiful thing, and I just want to leave you with just the understanding that everything that React does, or everything that they try to do in giving us new features, in changing the framework, is all in the service of making our code more composable, more declarative, and easier to deal with. And I think that's why React has the staying power that it does, and that's why I think it's going to be relevant indefinitely. So thank you very much for coming, and enjoy the rest of the conference.